This isn't an ad for Cinco de Mayo, and the words Cinco de Mayo definitely didn't make you want a margarita just now. But if they did, you should stock up for Cinco on Drizzly. Drizzly is the easiest way to find the best prices on beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered to your door. Download the app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Or don't. Totally up to you. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Steve Edwards.
Howdy from Portland.
AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live from the Boxcar Children's Den.
Right. We also have Amy Knight.
Hey, from Nashville.
We've missed you, Amy.
I have missed you, Chris.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. I just scheduled a whole bunch of workshops for the next several weeks at topenddevs.com/workshops. So go check that out. We have a special guest this week, and that is Feross Aboukhadijeh.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Coming at you from San Francisco.
Yeah, it feels like it's been forever since we've had you on. What's new with you, Feross?
Well, a whole bunch of things. I started teaching a class at Stanford on web security. I started a company working on supply chain security, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. And I got engaged. A whole bunch of things.
Woo! Woohoo! Awesome. Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And lately I've been working on actually building out Top End Devs. If you're interested, you can go to topenddevs.com/podcast and you can actually hear a little bit more about my story, about why I'm doing what I'm doing with Top End Devs, why I changed it from devchat.tv to Top End Devs. But what I really want to get into is that I have decided that I'm going to build the platform that I always wished I had with devchat.tv. And I renamed it to Top End Devs because I want to give you the resources that are going to help you to build the career that you want, right? So whether you want to be an influencer in tech, whether you want to go and just max out your salary and then go live a lifestyle with your family, your friends, or just traveling the world or whatever, I want to give you the resources that are going to help you do that. We're going to have career and leadership resources in there, and we're going to be giving you content on a regular basis to help you level up and max out your career. So go check it out at topenddevs.com. If you sign up before my birthday, that's December 14th. If you sign up before my birthday, you can get 50% off the lifetime of your subscription. Once again, that's topenddevs.com. So I don't know how much value people are going to get out of an engagement announcement, but it's exciting. So let's talk about web security.
I don't know. You asked what happened, and those are the
big things. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Good deal. So web security. Now you've been working on this stuff for a little while, and this is something I'm just going to set a little bit of the stage here because we've had conversations about this on Adventures in DevOps, but specifically about SolarWinds, which is supply chain security, which is what we're talking about here. Unless I'm wrong, right? Somebody got in to their build system and effectively inserted malware into their client when they built, and that compromised all of the other stuff. And I've been hearing about this more and more lately where people are, they're injecting stuff either into the packages you're using, or they get onto your machine and do it there, or you use a Docker container that has the malware on it as your base, and then you build from there. I mean, this is kind of frightening stuff because before it was just, I just got to harden this thing so somebody can't get in on port 8080.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
what are you seeing? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, everything goes out the window with the sort of traditional defense stuff when you start dealing with supply chain attacks, because now you're actually worried about the contents of the code, and the dependencies that you're using. And so it really makes you question your assumptions about what you're using and where you're getting all this code from. And most applications, most open source apps, most people's web apps are composed of 90-95% open source code.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just so many dependencies in the way that we write software. Things have really changed, and people are no longer writing an application and using a couple of dependencies. The standard these days is that you usually have at least 1,000 NPM dependencies, and that's just for a Hello World app.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's both a blessing and a curse, because by having so many wonderful open source packages out there, it helps us build software so much faster than we could before. So you have really small teams now able to build really powerful and complicated applications by just grabbing all these open source packages off the shelf that, it's like a buffet. There's all these open source packages out there. You can just grab as much as you need and slap it all together. And then you add your little bit of custom code on the top, which really makes your apps unique. And so you can have a team of like 2 or 3 people build something really, really amazing. But yeah, it comes with some downsides for sure. And security and supply chain security specifically is definitely one of those things.
So just tell me which packages not to use, and then we can get off the call.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. The problem is like, so say you actually like want to vet a package completely before you use it. You want to read every line of code. First of all, like that's just really hard to do, right? I mean, that's a thing that usually you have to have some, I mean, the reason why you're using an open source package is usually because there's some complicated problem that you don't understand. You don't really want to have to go learn about and understand. You kind of want to just grab it and use it as an encapsulated abstraction that you can just grab and use. And so even auditing it to like look and see what it's doing is actually a thing that requires some amount of skill that you may not have. And then on top of that, right, there's the amount of code that you'd have to audit. So, some of these dependencies are really big. The sheer number of them is a problem. And then you also need some idea of like what to be even looking for here. So, we're not just interested in vulnerabilities, in other words, accidental bugs that the maintainer has introduced. We're also worried about malware and intentional attacks being added. And that's, I guess we can talk about some of the examples of that have happened recently, but that's the real thing that you're looking for. You want to look for changes in kind of what a package is doing. In a lot of these attacks, you'll see a package's behavior suddenly change. And whereas before it may have never talked to the network or read files on your computer, suddenly a new version is published that's reaching out to the network and sending your data off to some random server or running a cryptocurrency miner. And this is like such a departure in behavior that if you were actually to like look at the code, you would see that, right? If you really fully looked at every line of code. But it's just not feasible on most teams, to actually do that. Not to mention the number of dependency updates that are flying around these days. So I don't know if you've ever installed Dependabot or Renovate or one of these bots that try to keep your dependencies up to date. But I get like 5 pull requests per day, basically. And so even if you did vet a dependency really well, it's, you're merging like 5 updates per day. And so the code that you're actually running has just potentially changed so significantly. And so that's kind of why it's just a really hard problem.
So my first question is, of course, are there really 1,000 problems that people have that they can't solve? Because I feel that the issue that I think that you're trying to address is an important one, which is that people already made this decision thinking or not thinking. But I think it's kind of like preventative care. If you don't want to have a heart attack, you might want to start, exercising, right? If you don't want to have all these problems, maybe learn how to program. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. Like, I'm totally on board with the idea of reducing dependencies, picking your dependencies really carefully, picking a package that does the bare minimum that you need and not like more than you need. So reducing bloat, right? I mean, you'll see things all the time, like, you want to make an HTTP request, and so you'll install some like helper library, right? Request is the most popular example in Node land. And you install request, and then request has all this support for all this crazy stuff. Like it can OAuth with, has OAuth support. It has support for all these weird, like it can talk to AWS and stuff. It has all this like extra crud that's added in there. And so you're trying to just make an HTTP request, but you now pulled in like 30 dependencies to deal with AWS, which you may not even be dealing with, right? And so that's just, it's a really hard problem in software, because it's like, do you want to have all the bells and whistles? Do you want to have all the API stuff that you need so that in the future, if you need that, it's there and it's supported and it's really awesome and it has all the features that you want? Or do you want something that just does exactly what you want so that it's perfectly tuned? I mean, no dependency is going to be perfectly tuned to your use case, but the goal is to try to find something that does exactly what you want and no more and no less. But even that is hard, because in the future, your needs might expand, and then now you'll regret that you picked a minimalist dependency. We ran into this when we were picking an internationalization library for a project I was working on, where there's a lot of them out there, and if you pick a really minimalist one, it'll work fine. But then you'll add a right to left language or something, or you'll need to do some kind of variable substitution, and then it turns out the I18N library that you picked is too simple, it's too minimalist. It actually doesn't work in some cases. So I don't know, it's just a really hard problem, but I agree with what you're saying. I think it's a good goal, but I don't know. Do you have any ideas in practice how to balance this? because it's a really hard problem, I think.
Well, I get a lot of pushback actually because it's become so common in the ecosystem that people don't realize that this is not normal. It's like back in the Roman times when they used to, just kill children that didn't perform well or something. It's absurd to think about today, but back in those times, it's just like, well, yeah, that's what you do with a kid that's a runt or whatever. It's just you take them out of society. It seems absurd. Now, obviously, using 1,000 dependencies isn't as absurd as taking someone's life, but to me, I come from the prior era where the idea that you would have 1,000 touch points that you don't understand and that you don't know where they come from and you don't know what they do is just absolutely absurd. But the people that are entering the workforce now, this is commonplace for them. They don't know any other way of doing it. The idea that you wouldn't want, say, 19,000 dependencies when you install Gatsby is just as ludicrous to them as anything else. So personally, what I try to do is figure out what problem we're trying to solve and then do a little bit of digging. I've posted on Reddit sometimes, hey, does anybody know of a library that does this that doesn't have 10 years of legacy? Because another thing with things like Request is you're not just dealing with whatever the library author is trying to do today. You're trying to deal with what they were trying to do over the last 8 years. And they may have matured and grown up, but everything depends on their library. So they can't break their library by chopping off all those AWS dependencies because then somebody needs to go update their package.json. So there's a lot of things in terms of ecosystem where I don't know what the solution is on a broad level. And I think that's kind of what you're handling is the more broad level solution. But on the local level, it's just, well, hey, look for something that's got maybe 10 to 100 stars rather than something that has 2,000 stars. And peek in the code and see, does the code look reasonable? Does it look like this person copied and pasted from Stack Overflow, which is a lot of what those 20,000 star modules are? Or does it look like this person wrote this from scratch and that they kind of had an idea of what they were doing?
Mm-hmm.
But again, you can't peek at 1,000 modules, but you can peek at 5. And if you peek at those 5, then maybe you don't need to peek at 1,000 because those 5 might just do what they need to do.
I think a lot of what has changed is it's not so much that people have forgotten how to program, I think, as much as that NPM was the first package manager that made it painless both to create dependency, like to create new packages, and also painless to depend on them. So before NPM, with Python and the pip package manager or whatever, easy install, whatever Python had before, you had this problem where if a package adds a dependency on some other package, then it's forcing all the other dependencies in the project to also use the same version of that dependency. Mm-hmm. So like if I depend on package foo at version 1, then every other part of the project that uses package foo has to also depend on version 1. And so it's this like really annoying thing to add a dependency to a project, because now you're forcing all the other dependencies to also be synced up with you. And so it led to this culture, I think, in that ecosystem of people just inlining code. Like rather than adding a dependency, they'll just copy the code. And if it's like 100 lines, you'll just copy it in. And then you could say, we don't have any dependencies. So it's really easy to use this library. And in NPM, they solved that problem by just saying, look, if I want to use version 1 of foo, and something else wants to use version 2 of foo, then that's fine. NPM will just install both versions of foo and we can move on with our life. It doesn't really matter. And so that made it, I think, like a lot more costless, or it feels costless to just be like, oh yeah, we can add a dependency on this rather than copying the code in, because like no one's going to complain to me about that, and it's going to work, and I don't have to write that 100 lines. And there's also some part of it that's actually arguably better in some ways, which is like even 100 lines, you can have a ton of bugs even in 100 lines of code, especially if it's tricky. And so there's some benefit to like being able to automatically inherit the bug fixes, although you also automatically inherit the new bugs as well. So
well, I think, again, I think this is kind of an ecosystem problem, though, because look at the Go community. You've dabbled in Go, at least, right?
Very, very, very briefly.
Okay. Well, the Rust community kind of has the same problem as NPM to some extent, but the Go community does not have this problem. And I think a lot of it has to do with the leadership, because the leadership says these are our values. We value being small, being simple, being understandable, being readable. A little copying is better than a little dependency. And the package manager solves all solvable problems that a package manager can solve, provably so. And So there's some amount of ethos that I think part of the problem is there is no leadership in the JavaScript community. There are no figureheads, but there aren't. There's no. There was Douglas Crawford,
I
and
don't
then
think
he went
that's the
away.
problem.
Okay, sure.
Because
I'm just saying that there is when there is some defined culture, people will fall into that culture.
So there are a couple things that I want to kind of pick out here. One is I do agree that if there was somebody out there kind of championing a particular approach or a particular way of doing things, or a particular tool, things like that, that everybody kind of agreed is our guy, right? So kind of like Ruby has Mats and whoever else has whoever else. You kind of have these benevolent dictators or what have you, right, that are making a lot of these calls. They kind of push things in a particular direction, right? Everybody who writes Ruby on Rails, they kind of do things the way DHH does them because that's how Rails is written, right? Mm-hmm. And so it kind of forces the Ruby community to come along in certain ways along with that, right? So you've got these opinionated pushes. But the difference is that the pips and the Rubies or the Ruby gems and the other package managers, they kind of came about before the community really had a large set of established practices going on. And with NPM came on the scene after, 15, 20 years of web development, right, going on, and all kinds of packages or libraries already being written in JavaScript, and it tried to encompass all of it. And so it had to go and be compatible with the way things had been done in a whole bunch of different places, and there was a lot to manage.
I disagree. What did it have to be compatible with? Because they blazed the new trail. They fixed a lot of problems that had existed before because of the experience of the Ruby people coming over and a few of the Python people coming over.
They did, but at the same time, and speaking specifically about what Feross is talking about here, where he's saying, you could pick up different dependencies of different libraries depending on, I've got 8 libraries I'm pulling in here. 4 of them use different versions of Lodash, and so it doesn't matter, right? Because it just pulls in all 4 versions of Lodash. That was kind of important because before what you would wind up doing is you would pull down a bundle of like jQuery, right? And you would stick it on your page. And then, if you pulled in some other library that did something else and it depended on a different version of whatever jQuery depended on, it kind of lived in that space. Right.
Okay, so you're talking about NPM for the browser, not NPM for Node.
Right. But if NPM had just stayed a Node thing, I think it wouldn't have had to try and encompass some of these other issues. But because people were using it and Browserify and some of these other ones, they all had a lot of the same problems in the sense that they were trying to solve these issues for multiple ecosystems that had an established way of approaching these problems. And I don't know that anybody really could have championed a right approach to this. I think it's something we're going to wind up solving over the next several years still.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind too is like, even if you don't have I agree, 1,000 dependencies, it's a lot of dependencies. And the statistic that I think is mind-blowing, by the way, just to throw it out there because I didn't mention it earlier, is that the average NPM package has 79 dependencies on other third-party packages, and you have to also trust 39 maintainers. So
you get to 1,000 fast.
Yeah, you get 2,000 fast, and so that's mind-blowing, right? I mean, it is a huge number, but I don't want to make it seem like that's the only problem, and like NPM is unique in having a risk of supply chain attacks, because we're also seeing them in other ecosystems.
You are definitely.
Yeah, so it's not just it's not like this is not helping the problem that you have to trust 39 people that you don't know who they are. But it's contributing to the problem, but it's not the only problem. I mean, the bigger problem, and I think, is that no one actually reads this code. I mean, the problem is that you're basically trying to do something really, really crazy, and it's a miracle that it even works. So you have, we're trying to download code from the internet written by unknown individuals. We haven't read the code, and then we want to execute the code with full permissions on our laptops and on our servers, and we keep all of our most important data on those machines. And we expect this to go well, right? it's like that is a crazy thing, and it's crazy that it has even worked as long as it has. But I think like we can address the problem by sort of looking at each of those things independently and thinking about like how can we actually improve things. So one thing is like we could read the code. That's one thing, right? I mean, we could actually take a look at the code that we're using before we use it. Now,
I'm really glad you have time for that.
I mean, what I mean by look at the code isn't necessarily that a human is looking at it.
Okay.
It's a spectrum, right? You can either, on the one hand, you can take a really aggressive stance. So there's some companies, really big companies such as Google, that treat third-party dependencies as their own code, and they check it into their own repository at Google, and then they basically vet it and they treat it it's their own code, and they're very very careful with updating to the latest version. They look at the diff and they decide whether they want to update. So it's they treat it as their code, and so that's one approach, very very expensive approach. You need to have a team of dedicated people basically just doing that. So most companies, most startups, can't do this. And then on the other hand, you have the like do nothing, like let's just YOLO, like it's fine, let's just install whatever, let anyone install whatever they want and hope for the best. And that's the way that pretty much most companies and most teams and most projects do things, because it's just the way that everyone else does things, and it doesn't feel like there's really anything else you can do. You can try with some of what AJ's. I mean, you can try to pick pick fewer dependencies and be more careful, but fundamentally, you're not really looking at that code, and you're also not looking at the updates that are coming in. So I think that neither of those approaches is good, and you need a middle ground approach, and that's what Socket does. That's what my project does.
So you can also take the approach that Apple and Microsoft take, which is because we also have to define what scope you're trying to solve for. Because at the small scope, you certainly can, when you're picking a dependency, take a look and see, does this look like a trustworthy author? Just take one click to see them on LinkedIn. Are they a real person? Take one click to look at the index.js and just scroll. Does this look like this was written by somebody who has an understanding of the problem space and the solution space and the language at hand? And if not, sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you can take crap code that you can tell was copied and pasted from Stack Overflow because you just need it right then and just mark it as a note of, okay, I'll go back and reevaluate this later. But
that always happens.
But
yeah, I mean, AJ, you also got to remember though that like even trustworthy authors can turn not trustworthy, like the attack we saw recently.
Oh, absolutely.
With Merrick sabotaging his own code, and also maintainers can lose their passwords and can get hacked. Their machines can get compromised. Their passwords can get.
I think I missed that one.
What
happened?
I'll just quickly summarize it for Charles. So there was a maintainer that basically went rogue. He maintained a couple of popular projects. One of them is called Colors. The other is called Faker. And he just decided one day to wake up and sabotage his own packages and replace them with code that prints out a bunch of random Unicode stuff, junk, random junk. He added like infinite loops, just all kinds of just garbage like that, and published it as a patch so that other dependency, other people who depended on it would just get it if they weren't being careful. And so things like the Amazon AWS CLI tool was affected by this, because if you installed it, you would get the latest version of this guy's library. Right. And so that's an example that happened literally last month in January. And it, his packages had 100 million downloads. So even if at one point that was a good library and he was a trustworthy person, like he can just wake up one day and decide to go rogue. And so it doesn't discredit the other points you're making, AJ, but I just wanted to mention because it is also.
Yes, I agree with that. So the other part I was going to say, so that's on the small scale. I'm saying as an individual team with a few people, you can do some level of auditing to kind of get a sense of what's the debt we're bringing on with this. And whether you're a small team or a large team, you can also take the Microsoft and Apple approach, more so if you're in a large company like Microsoft or Apple, where they print money, which is they don't use third-party code. They might go inspect it to kind of see how something is done or whatever, as long as it's not under the GPL, if it's under an MIT or an Apache or an MPL license or something like that. But they don't use third-party code. And if they do, their version system is locked. It's not a loosey-goosey thing. I think the number one thing people need to know about Node is that npm install is an alias for npm install -- random. I think people need to know that. And that the only acceptable install is npm CI, unless you were trying to get random dependency versions. Which I don't think is what anybody wants to do. I don't think anybody wakes up and says, hey, I want to just roll a dice and see what gets installed when I run npm install. But that is the default behavior. So there's that too. Actually having version locking in place and then Just for simple things, just write your own code. And for very complex things, evaluate it.
Yeah, so I totally agree with your broad points. I think, so if you just take an example though of like a project that we worked on before we built Socket, it was this thing called Wormhole. You can check it out at wormhole.app. It's a way to send files securely with end-to-end encryption in your browser. And we tried really hard to make sure that the server doesn't see your files, doesn't see your data. And, when we were building it, like we were a 2-person team at the time. And so we needed to rely on other people's code. I mean, we couldn't feasibly write this from scratch. I mean, the problem is we wanted to do stuff like peer-to-peer file transfer so that we could make the site really fast. And so we had to pull in dependencies to help with that networking stuff, right? I mean, there's a world where we could have sat down and just like hammered all this code out and it would have taken us like a year. And then maybe we would have ended up building the wrong thing, and no one would have wanted this thing and we would have wasted a year of our life working on it. Instead, we decided like, we're going to pull in some dependencies. We got it done in 2 months. And now, we released it and it has over 100,000 people using it every month. And we made a trade-off where we decided like it's better to get this into the hands of users. We'll do our best to pick dependencies carefully, but we're not going to sit down and like read everything. And so then after launching and like after realizing, okay, a lot of people like this and now they're relying on us, then we started asking ourselves like, is there more we could do to go back and take a closer look at the dependencies that we selected beyond just like cracking open the index.js and looking at it, beyond just looking at the maintainer and saying, have they historically been trustworthy? But also like, what do we do about updates? Like when we get a new version update for something, we'd love to be able to update to it. But it seems like, in most of the recent supply chain attacks, that's been a vector. So like you update to a new thing and then it's actually worse for you. You end up, the behavior changes and now suddenly it's talking to the network. Now suddenly there's a crypto miner in there. Now suddenly, it's stealing all the passwords on your computer, or it's stealing your NPM RC file where you keep your NPM token. And so what we realized we needed is some kind of automation. Like if we could basically have our attention automatically like drawn to a suspicious update, and we could take a close look when automation detects that something is suspicious about this new version or about this new dependency, then we could spend our limited time on the packages which are the most likely to be dangerous. So for example, if I've been using a package for like the last year and it has never used an install script, so it doesn't run any code upon installation, but then suddenly like today, I see there's a new update available and the package is now running code upon installation, right? That's pretty weird. That's not normal. That's not a thing that you see very often. And so it's probably worth calling that out so that the reviewer who's looking at this update, this pull request, sees like, hey, there's something that's changed significantly about the permissions that this package requires. You can almost think about it like the way a phone app works, a smartphone app or a Chrome extension, where when an app needs more permissions suddenly, it doesn't just get to use them whenever it wants. It has to actually prompt the user. So you'll see a thing that says like, this Chrome extension needs new permissions. What do you want to like let it use them? And so that's kind of what the model we're trying to bring to dependencies, where you install a dependency, you get shown upfront what capabilities it requires. Does it use the file system? Does it talk to the network? And then going forward, if those capabilities change and it suddenly needs new capabilities, that we can alert you to that fact and you can be informed before you make a decision about whether to update or not. And we can link you directly to the line of code in the package where it is doing that new thing, that new behavior, and you can look for yourself and see, is this a reasonable behavior or not? So if you do that, then you can catch the most egregious supply chain attacks of the last year.
So it sounds like you're describing what I wish my kids would do, right? They just go ahead and do what they want instead of asking for permission when their desires change. One thing that I kind of want to, and I was looking for a way to derail us exactly to where you went. So this is perfect, because I think everybody kind of understands the issue, right? As far as like how dangerous this is, and all the things that you and AJ kind of went back and forth on are things I really just don't want to take the time to do, right? I want to go build stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we get into this, now it's all right. So yeah, what do I look at? Like, how do I know? And automation seems kind of obvious, right? It's like there's no way for me to just intuit from the npm packages folder. Oh, that one. I need to look closer at that one, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I've seen products where they kind of keep track of known vulnerabilities, and they'll tell you, hey, this one is out of date. This one has this vulnerability open to it. A lot of times it has a CVE number attached to it. But the problem with that is half the time the damage is already done by the time somebody exposes it. And so what I want to know, it sounds like you've got Socket that does something else, right? something other than, hey, that one's bad. We know that one's a problem. So and one of the things you're talking about is, does it execute code when it installs? I think there are some NPM packages that actually do this. I've heard that. But outside of that, what else are you looking at? And how do you know, even if it does execute right off the bat? I mean, some things I might want it to, right? So...
Yeah, I think the idea isn't to ban any of this stuff. It's just to make sure that you're informed about what the package is going to do before you choose to use it. And so it's almost like you can think of it like a nutrition facts label, right? Like no one is trying to, a nutrition facts label doesn't ban any kinds of foods. But what it does is it says that when you pick up that food off the shelf at the store, you can take a look at it and you can know what you're getting. You can see what the ingredients are. Maybe you see that there's peanuts in there and you're allergic to peanuts, and so you don't want that. Or maybe you care about how many calories or how much sugar it has, and you can see that and you can make your own decision. And so that's all that Socket is trying to do, is to sort of surface this information about what the packages are doing, so that you can make an informed decision about whether to use it. And I think CVEs you mentioned, so there's a lot of tools out there that will tell you if a package has known vulnerabilities in it. And that's pretty different than what I'm talking about here. So maybe it's worth spending a minute on it just to distinguish it, because a known vulnerability is accidentally introduced by a maintainer. So it starts out as a vulnerability, and then it becomes a known vulnerability once the security researcher finds it, or somebody discovers this bug. And then they write up a report about it and send that to the maintainer and ask the maintainer to fix it. And then they'll hopefully fix it in a timely manner and publish a new version that has the bug fixed. And then what happens at that point is a CVE number is issued. And this is basically just a number that goes into a database that says this bug existed in this package, it was in this version, and the bug was fixed in this other version. So if you update to this new version, then the bug will be fixed. And that all just goes into a database. And so there's a lot of tools that'll tell you, hey, this package you're installing, it has 3 vulnerabilities that we know about. That's something that NPM audit does, for example. That's built right into NPM. You can run NPM audit. It'll tell you, hey, this package has these 10 known vulnerabilities. The thing about known vulnerabilities... Look what you did. Yeah, I mean, and it's really noisy too. It's actually something that developers basically ignore these days. I mean, you can't really install a package without getting a ton of those these days. And so people are just sort of rightfully kind of ignoring them. And a lot of them are listed as high criticality or critical level. And then you look at them and they're not that big of a deal a lot of the time. It's stuff that's like, a denial of service in a regular expression in a tool that you only run in development to build your own JavaScript. So it's like, that's never going to be exploited by a real attacker, right? So people are sort of getting tired of the noisiness, and it's like the boy who cried wolf. Everything has known vulnerabilities in it, and sure, you should try to reduce them, but like it's not most of them. Like 95% of the ones you get from NPM audit are just noise, right? And so this is a problem that everyone is like talking about now and trying to improve the signal to noise. But there's this whole other problem that no one is talking about yet, and no one has really tried to address, which is, what do you do about intentionally introduced malware? So what if a maintainer goes rogue and adds malware to their own package, like we saw in January? Or what if a maintainer's account gets compromised and a new version is published that has malware in it, like we saw back in October with UA Parser JS, Koa, and RC? 3 packages that were compromised. They each had 30 million downloads a month, and those got compromised, and malware was added that would basically download a cryptocurrency miner, run it on your computer, mine Monero, send that to the attacker. And then on Windows, it actually did an extra step, which was it would go into the Windows credential manager and steal all your Windows passwords, as well as passwords from 100 different applications on your machine. And UA Parser JS was depended upon by React Native. So like anyone who was using React Native, who typed npm install React Native during this window, which I think it was a 4-hour window during which this malware was on npm, was compromised. Like you would have all your passwords stolen. You have to go now reset all your passwords. Your computer is basically hosed. You need to really honestly just delete it and reinstall everything from scratch to be safe. Change all your passwords, right? Not a good situation. So that's what malware is. Malware is it's not a thing that a security researcher, when they find malware, they don't just like publish a CVE about it. They go and they get NPM to take it down off of the NPM registry. And then usually there's not a CVE filed. Sometimes there is, but in most cases, there's not. In the last month, 700 packages were taken down from NPM for various reasons, including malware and security reasons. And there were not 700 CVEs published. So there's just, this stuff is getting published all the time and taken down all the time. Just constant malware going on NPM and getting taken down. And no one is reporting CVEs for this stuff. So it's like you need another way to basically avoid accidentally installing some of this stuff. It's not enough to just like hope for after the fact that a CVE will go into a database weeks too late and that you're going to run a tool that tells you, hey, you're running this bad version. It's too late at that point, right? So that's kind of that's the key. Like that's the key problem is like these malware attacks, these supply chain attacks are increasing, and there's so many examples we could talk about. But yeah, they're just October, literally just last October. There's massive ones in those 3 packages I mentioned. So yeah, that's the kind of difference between looking for known vulnerabilities and looking for malware or supply chain attacks. Hopefully that makes sense.
I had a question I wanted to bring up. So let me figure out how to word this, just to like circle back to. So before I ask my question, I'm gonna like go over thoughts. So I always am like I feel like the person on teams who's like the not fun person that all the developers hate, like the old person that, and I swear it's because I come from like not a traditional background. So I come from more of like the business side of things where I'm just like constantly reminding people that our jobs, when we're working for a company, our job, for better or worse, there's a contract there. We're supposed to build things for this company because it makes the company money, and we're helping the company make money, and in exchange we get a paycheck for that. Now, I mean, that's just the way it works. For better or worse, people might not like it, but at the end of the day, for our jobs, that's how it works. Now, if you're doing stuff on your own, completely different story, do whatever you want. So knowing that, I feel like it is our responsibility as engineers, developers, programmers, whatever you want to call us, to make a case to the business for these types of things. Like as a responsible engineer, I'm, working for this company. It is my responsibility, and I should also be held liable if I am pulling in any of these packages. So I would say I feel like there needs to be higher stakes for people who, I don't know, there's a little bit of gray area there because like we talked about at the beginning of the show with the issue in January, like you can't always predict what someone is going to do. But at the same time, like you need to do somewhat due diligence on things. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm looking at our conversation. All that to say, I guess, so the tool that we're talking about today that you're working on, how friendly would you say that is to like someone coming from more of the business side? Because is this a responsibility that we could share with product and engineering, or is this something that like engineering is going to have to take sole responsibility for and work with product to say like, hey, we need to educate you on why this is important?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's, so let me start over.
I said a lot, so sorry.
Yeah. So we designed Socket to be super easy to install. The easiest way to install it is it's a GitHub app. So it's like, it takes like a minute. You go and you click install, you say apply it to all my repositories in my GitHub organization, and then you're done. Like that's it. So what that means is that an engineer can install it, or the head of security can install it, or a product person can install it. Really anyone who cares about security and wants to make sure that this stuff is being looked at can go ahead and install it. But we've designed it to be really friendly for developers, because the way that it operates is once this GitHub app is installed, it takes a look at all pull requests that are happening on a project. And anytime package.json file is changed and a dependency is added or a dependency version is updated, it will look at the version that you're trying to add, that the developer is trying to add, and it will check for a whole bunch of things. It'll say, does this new version have any obfuscated code, right? Does it look like it's a typo? Like, is the package, we found, for example, there's a package called browser list, but it's a typo of browsers list. And our tool found that Preact project was using browser list instead of browsers list. And so we sent them a pull request to fix that. But this was a package that at one point was malware. And now it's just it got taken down, and now it's just throws an exception and says, hey, you installed the wrong package. But there's no good reason for anyone to depend on that typo. It's just risk you're adding to your project for no reason. It's literally a dead code. We can look at dependencies and say, hey, this looks like a typo. It's 2 letters off from another package that has 1,000 times as many downloads. And so the bot will come in and post a message and tell the developer, hey, just double checking. I just want to make sure that you intended to install this package and not this other one. And of course, the developer is free to ignore that if they want, if they're really sure that they installed the correct package. But this is the kind of automation that it's very low cost. It doesn't really get in the way. It just adds information, gives the developer information, and then they can go ahead and do whatever they want to do. And it's the kind of information that I think most developers would be really happy to get. It's like, whoa, you saved me, like I almost installed a typo.
Yeah.
And like now this thing just told me that, and I can, or maybe the reviewer noticed it, like, maybe it could tell you that this package accesses the network on these 3 lines. And now the reviewer, maybe a junior developer sent in a pull request, right? And they don't necessarily know what the implications of talking to the network are. But a senior developer who's reviewing this can say, wait a minute, like, why does this package, which is like rendering a calendar component on the page, why does it need to talk to this .ru domain, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, that's a good conversation to have before this pull request is merged. And the cool thing is that it's actually not just going to check, it's not going to open up just the first dependency. It's going to look at all the transitive dependencies too, and it's going to find if any of those talk to the network, and it'll it'll leave a comment and let the reviewer know that. And so it's just giving information, and it's the kind of thing that really anyone can install it, a developer, a security person, product person, whoever values this. And we've seen basically all kinds of people installing it for all kinds of reasons. Some people just because they're compliance, they want to make sure that they're following all the best practices, and they have some customer that's asking them about, hey, like tell me about all these open source packages you're using, and like, how are you making sure that they're secure? And they can say, well, we installed Socket, and now we know that at least we're checking for these things. And other people are doing it just because they like the idea of like knowing what's in their dependencies, and they want to make sure that none of them are just talking to the network without them knowing, or contain random blobs of code that look like they could be doing who knows what. So yeah.
Hi, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been coaching some people on starting some podcasts, and in some cases just taking their career to the next level. Whether you're beginner going to intermediate going to advanced, whether you're trying to get noticed in the community or go freelance, I've been helping these folks figure out how to get in front of people, how to build relationships, and how to build their careers and max out and just go to the next level. So if you're interested in talking to me and having me help you go to the next level, go to topenddevs.com/coaching. I will give you a 1-hour free session where we can figure out what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and figure out what the next steps are. And then from there, we can figure out how to get you to the place you want to go. So once again, that's topenddevs.com/coaching.
And I think, like, I don't know, talking out loud here a little bit. I think the point I was like trying to make is I feel like we, at least if you've been doing this for a while, probably need to hold yourself and your team to a little bit higher standard. Like going back to what AJ was saying at the beginning. I mean, I'm going to make the analogy to like an SRE team. Like it doesn't matter what the application teams are deploying. Like our job is on the line if production goes down. Doesn't matter if I have not touched the app code ever in my life. Like if I am supporting an environment and it goes down because some, application causes a pod to run out of memory, or the container in the pod to run out of memory, like that is on me. So I guess I'm just saying, like, if I'm adding something to a project and I add a dependency that is doing something malicious, whether it's my fault or not, hopefully the company or your boss, whatever, has some grace about the situation, but we definitely need to like hold ourselves to a higher standard. There should be like a postmortem about this kind of stuff, just all that. Anyways,
yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing that's going to become a best practice in the coming year, if not like sooner than that, because there was a time when like two-factor authentication was considered like a nice to have, but now you can't really launch a service without your customers demanding it and saying, "Where's the 2FA on this? I can't deploy this without 2FA." So 2FA is now standard, and so I think also vulnerability scanning has become pretty standard. So that's why it's built into NPM. That's why have NPM audit. But I don't think anyone is doing this next level of like, what are the capabilities of this package? And I think that's going to start to become standard in the coming year, because I wish it wasn't true, but it seems like every month now, or every month or two, there's like another one of these supply chain attacks. And so it's just an unacceptable level of risk. I've always, by the way, this isn't even a new thing for me. I've always been my mind has always been boggled by how NPM install works. Like, even like 5 years ago, whenever I was running NPM install, I'm just like, whoa, look at all the code coming in, and I'm like, I don't know what any of this is doing. And I'm running this on my computer, and I have a folder over here with like all my, family photos and like all my tax returns and all like my social security number. It's all just sitting in PDF files in this folder. And I'm just like hoping that, and so, I'm just hoping that none of those people have turned evil, or that none of them have had their account hacked or chose a 5-letter password. So it's really a problem that's been around for a while. It's just not, for some reason, the bad guys haven't really like discovered this gold mine sitting there until recently. And so,
and now we're sitting here telling them how to do it, right? Great.
Well, Maybe. But if you've got all that stuff on your computer for us, I have this picture I want you to look at. I'll email it right over.
Okay.
So I lost the connection there for a little bit, and so I missed all of what Amy said and half of what you said, Feross. But one thing that I wanted to know is, can this detect if you're now doing a require HTTP or a require FS where that didn't used to be there, and surface that as, hey, this is now accessing the file system, but it didn't used to. Hey, this is now accessing the network, but it didn't used to at the internal level, not just the dependency level, but what capabilities of Node are you trying to require, or what capabilities of the browser are you trying to require?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so you can think of this like a linter. So it statically analyzes the dependency and all of its transitive dependencies, and it looks for capabilities that it's using. So it looks for, does it use the file system? Does it use the network? Does it use eval? Does it use the shell? Does it use debugging features of Node? Does it dynamically require something that we can't tell at static analysis time what it's doing? So for example, if you require like a variable instead of a string, right? You type require something complicated that we can't figure out what it's requiring, then we'll mark that as a dynamic require, which means we don't know what it's doing. It could be anything, but so you should assume the worst, basically, because that's really weird. And most of the time, people don't require some convoluted string. But
for that sort of thing, are you using ESLint, or you have your own?
We have our own. Yeah, so we parse the EST, and then we just have our own detections that we could have used ESLint, but we just are doing. We're doing a few other things that it was just easier to do our own thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, okay, so you said you got the. Oh, I lost my thought. I had another question. I lost it. Maybe I'll come back to it.
It's interesting, while AJ's thinking his deep thoughts, I can remember LeftPad, how a library with 8 lines basically took down the internet when something went wrong with it. And I think didn't it just add some padding to the left side of a string of text or something like that? It was incredibly tiny library. But
yeah, it's called StartPad now. The official spec is called
that's
StartPad.
right, because somebody took it.
And by the time that problem happened, that had already been in the standard library, but it was created back in the olden days, back in the ES5
right
era.
Anyway, I can remember at the time that this came out, this subject people started noticing it more, that all the dependencies, and somebody said create Racked App had over 1,000 dependencies on it when you installed it out of the gate. But I remember a blog post, and I wish I could find it, where this guy went through and audited, some popular NPM packages that people used and looked at what they did behind the scenes. And I always remember one that every time somebody downloaded, installed it, it sent out a tweet to a certain account, saying, hey, somebody just installed this. I don't remember what the tweet said,
wow.
But all kinds of just weird stuff that it would do, information it would gather, or stuff like that, sending out tweets. And yeah, it was a really interesting post, that just looking at all the weird things that people buried inside of their libraries.
Yeah, by the way, the example I gave earlier about a calendar component that was doing shell scripts was actually a real example that we found.
No way.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not a joke. Yeah, it's actually a real package. And we've seen a lot of weird stuff. There's also packages that will, you install them and then they will star themselves so that their NPM star count will go up. And then there's all...
Dang, I need to do that.
It's like free internet points. And then...
Dang, that's a good idea.
There's also one...
Why have I not been doing this?
There's also one that when you install it, it will uninstall itself. So it runs npm rm its own name. There's just weird crap. There's all this weird stuff on npm if you dig far enough. And the other thing, by the way, I'll mention too is, oh yeah, go ahead, AJ.
The box that you press the button and it reaches its hand and then turns itself off.
Yeah.
The flip switch box.
Yeah, it's exactly.
That's one way to increase your installation stats, right? Got to keep reinstalling it.
I know, right? Or my podcast numbers are going to go way up. I'll tell you what the package name is later.
Yeah, just hit it. Just do a quick little get request there in the background.
Yeah.
Every time the package is required, I'll get your numbers up really fast. Yeah, there's also, if people find it interesting, I'll mention too that we've been collecting all the packages that NPM removes over time. So whenever they take a package down from the registry for any reason, we've just been observing that fact. And we have a page on the website where you can look at all the removed packages. So we're not we just have basically a page where you can browse the files and see what they were doing. And it's super fascinating if you're curious, but you can go in there and just see all this crap that's been published. It really emphasizes the fact that NPM is basically a wiki that anyone can edit mean, there's no rules about what you can put on there. So it's just like if you're installing a package with like under 100 downloads a month, right? It could be anything. I mean, it's just like, it could be whatever. There's stuff that's just extremely, you can look at it's basically there's malware in that page. There's samples of actual malware you can look at and see what it would do. And that you can see like some of it is really dumb and really simple. It just takes like process.env, which contains all your environment variables, and it'll just curl that off to some URL.
Get your AWS
Yeah,
keys.
exactly. So there's stuff like that. There's stuff there's just giant piles of obfuscated code that's just like an entire screen full of just, you don't even know what it's doing, but it's clearly something not good. So we have a detection for that, where you just detect that the entropy in the file is really, really high and it looks unnatural. It doesn't look like normal code. And so we can also warn about that. There's stuff in there that is like spam. I mean, it's not even like necessarily malware, but it's like someone just published the package because they want to get links to their like Viagra site, and so they just are using the npm site as like a link to get free links to their website. There's security researchers publishing stuff on there that's like probably not malicious, but still like phones home that it was run to track that. There's all kinds of weird stuff on there. If you're curious, you can poke around it and like let me know if you find anything interesting. But it's on socket.dev. You can just go socket.dev, and then in the footer we have a link that says removed packages. And if you click that, you can see every package that's been removed from npm in the last couple months that we've been saving them.
So we're about an hour in at this point, and I still have way more questions. I'm trying to decide if we want to push to a part 2 or...
I would love a part 2, personally.
Because...
So like we go another hour?
No, I can't go another hour. I have a call in a half hour or about 40 minutes. But let's schedule another one of these. But in the meantime, let's just stay on this vein because, I have questions in a couple of other areas that I want to hit. But
okay, whatever you guys want to do. We could do it now for the next 40 minutes, or we could do it we could do it tomorrow. Just let me know.
Could we do it on Tuesday, Chuck?
Is Tuesday open?
I don't recall if this next Tuesday's open, because I thought we could bump Dan.
Yeah, we've got something this Saturday, or excuse me, this Tuesday.
Yeah, we have
George something.
Georgi Nikolov.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see it now. Okay, it's the following Tuesday. It's the March 1st is when we could bump Dan.
Yeah,
and he'd probably be all right with that. Plus, he'd probably enjoy being in on this discussion too.
Yeah.
So is the idea that it would be like 2 podcasts, basically?
Yeah, it would be 2 episodes.
Cool. Yeah, that works for me. Yeah.
Because I want to continue the discussion, but I also need to get back to work because I'm off cycle because it's Thursday. And
Right.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for all the good questions. Yeah. I realize there's like a lot to discuss here. It's not simple. And I mean, even the discussion at the beginning on the like way we code these days, that could have been a whole episode.
It could have been. And what's interesting is that kind of bringing this back into a conversation, those approaches aren't wrong. It's just the reality is that at some point you're going to need to depend on some open source code for anything that's reasonably complex. And at that point, you really want to know that, you're not exposing yourself or your employer or your customer or whoever, right? Your client, if you're freelance, to things that are going to compromise the integrity of the app. And so, it's super, super interesting just to look at. And I like the approach that you've got as far as, looking at the code and looking for specific patterns. As soon as you said, and we grab all the packages that they pull off of NPM and we store them so we can look at them. And my brain went, that's really smart. And not in a condescending way, but I didn't think of that. And it seems pretty obvious to me when you say it way. So
there's so much interesting stuff in there. And it's like,
what number of terabytes are we up to
on all of NPM, the size of all of NPM?
Yeah, and how many people are basically hosting their YouTube vlogs and using it for just free storage hosting for anything?
I didn't think of that either. That's what I'm doing next week, guys. The whole catalog is going to be on NPM. NPM install top end devs.
Just download the whole thing. No, we should make every episode should be its own dependency, so that.
Oh, there we go. And episode 2 will depend on episode 1, and episode 3 will.
But you could totally get away with it. You could put a couple hundred megabytes, and that's what dependencies are these days. Just put a test folder, put a test folder, and then put fixture.mp3.
Yeah.
So getting serious here for a minute, though, it sounds like socket.dev is the place to go to check this out.
Yeah, socket.dev is where we're putting all the stuff we're working on. You can go to socket.dev, you can look up any package. So all the data is public. You can just search any package name and we'll show you all the things that our analysis detected. And then we also have these scores for each package that sort of try to summarize like what the what the quality of each package is in terms of different areas. So what's the security, what's the quality, what's the maintenance, what's the license? So just give you like an overall picture of the quality. That's the thing you can get on socket.dev. And then there's also the GitHub app you can install too.
Right.
So Chuck, was this a podcast episode or an infomercial for socket.dev?
I do bonus episodes with paid product folks, and what I hope we get to is just kind of where we got here, where it was like, look, there are all these things you can be looking for, right? And you can go do it on your own, right? If you could write your own script to do it, I mean, whatever, right? It's a non-trivial problem, but you could, right? If you didn't want to go use socket.dev or pay for a service that does what it does or whatever, I haven't even looked to see what you pay or what level is free or whatever. But the reality is that these are things that people need to think about. And so there's a ton of valuable content here, and you can shortcut part of the process by checking out Socket, right?
Yeah.
That's what I aim for with these shows where, we have somebody on that works for a company that solves a problem.
So question I have, I just looked at one of my own packages on this. I've got a 47 score of maintenance, which makes me sad, but basically the thing is complete. So why that's one thing I think is really that I don't like, is that when modules are complete, when they do what they need to do and the only changes are extremely rare and frequent, they get dinged on all these metric systems. Shouldn't it get 100%? Like the module's complete.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's hard because if you're choosing something that's a top level dependency, like a web framework or something where there's constant churn and there's always stuff, you don't want to pick a framework that hasn't been updated in 2 years because you're just asking for sad times. But on the other hand, if you're picking a library that's supposed to do one thing and do it well, then actually having it not change is a positive. It can be, right? Especially if it's really solid and it's really perfect, then you don't want random API changes in this like library that you're using to do one specific thing, right? So it's really hard to make a metric that gets that perfectly right. I think right now on the version of the site you're looking at, we might be slightly too aggressive, and that's something that I want to fix in the next few weeks and make it less. It shouldn't penalize a package for being done. I agree with you. Totally.
I'm going to push on this a little bit and then go ahead, AJ.
So another question I have is, so what this is, it's at root request. It's a drop-in replacement for request. So it's the same API as request, but there's no dependency on AWS or OAuth or any of that. It is literally if you're using request in your code, this would be a drop-in replacement for almost every use case, right? For the average person. And there is one thing that most of the time you don't need the form data library, but occasionally do, because most of the time you're dealing with JSON, right? And so in there, I have this little line where if you try to use form data, then it will require it, but it's not listed in the dependencies, and this is on purpose. And I'm wondering, because I don't want it to install, the goal with, I'm very strict on my modules. I do not, anything that's a pure development dependency that's tooling, I don't even put it in dev dependencies. I put it in the NPM script, mpx prettier at 2.x, right? It doesn't even, no one ever needs to install it unless they run the prettier script, in which time it'll be installed. Same thing with if there's a dependency where if you're using this particular feature of the library, then yes, you will need to have read the documentation and pre-install this thing that handles that. But what I'm talking about here is most of the time people don't need that. So I don't want to put it in the dependencies because I don't want it to get installed for somebody when they're likely not going to use it. Is there a solution to that problem?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because I'm using things in the NPM scripts that aren't in the dev dependencies, but that's on purpose because they don't need to be, because unless you are actually a maintainer, git cloning this and then running those scripts, there is no reason for you to have those things installed. Or, so even if I'm doing an npm install locally and rather than an npm CI only production, like there's just, So there's some of those things I would love to see, like a blog article on, for example, because maybe you can prescribe this is how we suggest you do this so that you limit dependencies, that you don't have extraneous things being installed, but then you also don't get dinged.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a great suggestion. I think we need more information for each of these detections to explain what you can do to, like, what we recommend doing instead. I think what you're doing, it makes a lot of sense. You basically don't want to, you're trying to solve the problem you were complaining about earlier about too many transitive dependencies being installed by like defaulting to not install them unless they're needed. So yeah, I think for this specific issue, I would probably try to do some dependency injection. So like you have the user pass in their own implementation of the module instead of like assuming it's going to be there. You could tell them like maybe they could pass that into the constructor and say, this is the version of form data to use. And I went and installed it and required it so that your package doesn't have to like require a thing that's not in its package JSON. But yeah, I don't know. We can look at that further. I'd love to get more of your thoughts if you find more of these things that you think it's being unnecessarily harsh on, because we're still tweaking the score.
Well, I'm all in on this tool, by the way. This is one of the first developer tools in this category that I'm looking for the pay me money button right now, actually. Where is that?
Yeah, we're right now we're planning to make it free for open source and then charge for private repos. So if you want to install the GitHub app on a private repo, we'll charge for it eventually, but it's free right now while it's in beta.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to find out what that pricing structure is going to be, because a lot of times what it does is it's too big of a jump. It goes from it's free to it's $10,000 a month. And it's like, well, I'm not big time. I can't give you $10,000 a month. Is there a $5, $10 a month plan kind of thing? Which I don't know. I think you're targeting enterprise and you're probably going to get pushed into the enterprise price point. But gosh, if people could just start out not as enterprise, but just as, I'm commercializing this. Yeah, I want to pay for this product.
Yeah,
now.
I know. I mean, as a person, as a developer myself who wants to use this and like would want to use this on all my projects, even the couple projects I have that are private, like I don't want this to be a thing that normal like people can't afford. So I totally agree. I want it to be accessible to people. So for sure.
All right. I'm going to derail us onto the end of the show. Yeah. I just wanted to add really quickly when you were talking about how much it's maintained. Sometimes that is an indicator if you know, for example, that the Node API has changed and you want to know that this library is going to be compatible with those changes if they've deprecated or dropped anything. So it's not enough. It's something to pay attention to, but yeah, different projects are going to have different life cycles on them. Anyway, let's go ahead and do picks, and then we'll figure out the scheduling for the next part of this. Because yeah, I mean, I have questions about a handful of other things related to this that are kind of new topics. That's why I didn't want to bring them in, because I didn't want to trigger another half hour's worth of talk on it if we can just do another episode. So let's hit the picks and then we'll hit the schedule. Hey folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium. Steve, do you want to start us off with picks?
Yes, I will start us off with a pick. First of all is a version of Wordle, the little popular word game. And there have been many variations of it. I've talked to 2 people in the Vue community that have done variations using Vue with slight tweaks. But I found one yesterday that was really funny, that instead of guessing a 5-character word, you try to guess a SHA-256 hash. And it's really, really funny. So it's called, I got to find it again on here on Twitter. But yeah, it was, here it is. It's a GitHub repo. It's just a page from a GitHub. Passwordle is what it's called. So I'll put the link in there. And then, the highlight of the dad jokes. In the past, I've always talked about my sordid work history, like when I got fired from my first job at a bank because an older lady came in and asked to have her balance checked. And so I pushed her over. So anyway, I just lost my joke here. Give me a second here. Okay. So in the past, I always liked Valentine's Day, and I used to open a lot of letters on Valentine's Day. So that was why I got fired from the post office. Thank you. And then last question, what do you get when you cross a police officer with a skunk? Law and Order. So I was a big Law and Order fan, so that's why I liked that one. Anyway, that's it for me.
Don't laugh. It only encourages him.
I heard him laughing, so it's too late, Chuck. Sorry.
I didn't realize that we were doing stand-up for our picks.
I don't know if it qualifies. Anyway, Amy, what are your picks?
Sorry, I had to find the mute button. Okay. I don't know if anybody can hear this noise behind me. I've been trying to look through my picks, and all my starred stuff is Kubernetes related, and I'm so out of JavaScript picks. I don't know. I'll drop one. I haven't really had a chance to look at it, but it's basically like chaos engineering for your cluster. I'll drop a link for that. It looks kind of fun. Definitely would want to spin up my own cluster and not do this on a work one. Unless I'm the one on call that week, then maybe that would be fun. But But going back to this noise that is probably going off behind me. So I am sitting right now because it's been a very busy morning. I usually do it. I have a Peloton and I usually ride that every morning. I didn't get to do it today because I had prod stuff I had to do early this morning. And when I get done with my ride, I usually put these things on my legs, which is what you can hear. And they're called Normatec compression sleeves. Feross is nodding like he knows what I'm talking about. So I'm sitting in these right now, and it's usually like you can go usually to a place near you. It's like $25 for 30 minutes. I just use my HSA card to buy a pair myself. So they're pretty expensive. But if I was paying $25 a pop to go, then I might as well just pay for my own pair. But if you're a little bit athletic and like to push yourself like I do, they help tremendously. So you can think of them, they're like this giant like blood pressure cuff, but they go around your legs. And so after you get done with a workout, they just like help speed up recovery. I swear by them. So that's the noise if people can hear that behind me, and that'll be my second pick.
Holy cow. Yeah, those suckers aren't cheap at all.
They're not, but I was like, I haven't been, because of COVID, like I don't do a heck of a lot anymore. I haven't traveled since like 2019. So haven't been to the doctor in like 3 years. I have an HSA. My HSA card covered all of it.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I try to invest my HSA. So I did, it's $800 or however much those things are now that I don't have in my HSA anymore. But heck, like when you have an HSA card and you have like the less expensive insurance from work, like just getting sick twice is going to be $800. So, I figured to pay for him that way. So
yeah, this thing looks awesome. I'd love to try it. I'm a runner, so I push myself way too hard all the time. I'm like a weekend warrior because I never get time to run during the week, and so I'll go out and do like an 8-mile run on Saturday, and then I'll just be wrecked for the rest of the week.
Yeah, I would say try to find a place near you that has a pair, and you could try them a couple times. Make sure that you like them, and then if you do, I mean, like I said, I was paying $25 to go a couple times a week, so it pays for itself eventually.
Yeah, I've been doing triathlon training, so I'm kind of in the same boat. My Peloton is the indoor rider that I put my tri-bike on.
But you'd be surprised what you can buy with an HSA card. So
yeah, that'll awesome.
Be that's my sub tip, I guess.
Very nice. Was there anything else? I don't want to cut you off.
No, that's it.
Okay.
I might jump. It was very nice to see you all. I haven't been here for a while, so hopefully I'll be back again soon.
We missed you.
Yep, totally.
All right, AJ, what are your picks?
Bye.
So first and foremost, I'm picking socket.dev because this is
I've heard of that.
This gives you such great overviews. I want to have some chat with you out of band, Feross, about, well, basically things that, we're already discussing. How do we get the score to look better for things that actually are really good and not get false negatives?
Yep.
And then I'm going to ask one more question real quick. Is there some sort of like some sort of config file that you can say, hey, it's expected that this should use the network. It's not a potential vulnerability. This is a request library. It should use HTTP. That shouldn't be a flag. Is there like a socket.json or something like that you do?
We don't do that yet, but that's a good idea. I mean, I think you got to think about the use case where you have a malicious person publishing the package and saying, everything's fine, so there's a little bit of balance,
but just to say, like typically on the phone, it says, well, why do you want access to network? Because it's going to check your email. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Anyway, I'm also going to pick, because we're in this vein, I'm going to pick Bundlephobia, which is this nice site that also tells you how scary your dependencies are. And it does it in terms of weight, what the size is, how many kilobytes it is transitively per the package and transitively. And then there's another site which I actually pasted into the chat, but then the chat got deleted because I had to refresh because I switched networks. Let me see if I can grab it real quick. It is npmgraph.js.org, which is like Bundlephobia, but it gives you the scary visualization of how those transitive dependencies look in terms of breadth and in terms of depth and in terms of, I guess, cyclicity as well. But you can see how everything relates to each other. So I'm definitely going to pick those couple of things. I'm so glad that we had you on to talk about socket.dev. This is quite amazing. And it shows you. It even shows you co-maintainers, which is a good metric of how involved is this person in the community. It's just Oh, so much good stuff here. I love this. I love this. I'm gonna pick saga.dev again.
Oh man, you're being too nice. But by the way, let me know if you have other ideas, because like we want this to be like the dream package search site. Like I don't know why the NPM website hasn't improved since like 5 years. Not to rag on them too much, but like it feels like there's so much potential for interesting data to show on these pages. So let me know if you have other good ideas.
Well, I've got an idea I'd like to discuss with you out of band, but basically getting paid source.
I think we just need to do an episode on that, AJ, because it sounds like you've got some ideas around it, and I'd like to give it proper air. But yeah, I'm going to jump in with some picks, and then we'll let Feross have his turn. So I usually do a board game pick. I think I might have missed the board game pick on the last round because I was fired up about something else. And I think I also picked Encanto last time, but we're within the same week, and so it throws off my whole schedule. So I'm going to pick Seven Wonders as the board game this week. And Seven Wonders, you kind of have this cardboard placard, I guess, in front of you that has a wonder that you're trying to build, and then you build your city, and your city gives you resources, and you get resources for just playing, and then you can also build armies, and you get points for your army size at the end of each round. You get points for buildings that you build. You get points for like buildings that match in specific ways. Like there are different sets that match in certain ways. And then you get points for basically uncovering your wonder. And so this is one of those games, honestly, and I think it's hilarious because most of the time I'll be playing a game with somebody and I know if I'm winning or not, right? I can usually tell. This game, I never have any clue until the end of the game when we tally up the points, right? Sometimes I have a feel that I did better than normal, but that's better than normal for me, not that I was winning. So anyway, it's a fun game. It's a rather popular one. It seems like a lot of folks that are into board games have it. So I'm going to pick that. And then the other pick I have is Airmeet. And so Airmeet is the system that I'm going to be using to run the workshops, conferences, and meetups on Top End Devs. So if you're looking to level up on stuff, most of the workshops that I have scheduled are career focused, right? So the first one is kind of long-term planning your career. Like, where do you want to end up, right? Do you want to end up doing open source stuff, company stuff like Feross? Or do you want to be a speaker and podcaster? Or do you want to be kind of the hero, the tech hero at whatever company you work for? Or and the great thing about it is, we'll talk about how to evaluate that so that you're heading towards something that'll make you happy. And then the next one, I keep getting asked, how do you stay current? How do I stay current? Which often translates into what should I be learning next? So that's the next workshop. I don't know if this is going to come out after those, but I'm pretty well committed to doing a workshop every week, unless I'm on a family vacation or something, something that I already have planned. It looks like I'm probably going to be doing them on Wednesday afternoons. But anyway, you can go check it all out at topenddevs.com/events. And I'm planning on inviting other people on, right? So I could foresee, inviting Feross on and having him do a workshop on how to make sure that your app's secure, or, have somebody else come on and do a workshop on that, whatever they're good at, right? And I'm good friends with a lot of people in the community that have a wide depth of knowledge, or wide breadth of knowledge, wide depth of experience. So anyway, looking forward to that. But Airmeet's what we're going to run it on. And the reason is because they have a feature where you can effectively open up tables and let people get on and talk to each other. And I feel like the networking is just as important as the content. And I want to open that up to people, especially since I talk to people and I'm like, you need to go to a meetup. And they're like, well, I looked and there was one here, but they haven't done it since the pandemic started. And I just find that exceptionally disheartening. And so I want to open that up to people. And the upside of this too is that you get to meet people all over the world. So anyway, those are my picks. And all of that will be at topenddevs.com/events. Like I said, I'll have the workshops, the meetups, and the conferences as we get that together. All right, Feross, what are your picks?
I'll start by picking Fetch in Node.js. So the Fetch API landed in Node 17, and that means that we no longer need to install Node Fetch or any of these goofy polyfills anymore. It's just the next step in how Node is becoming a browser. But in this case, it's actually good. I think that the Fetch API is actually quite good for like a built-in API, and so having that just be available in Node will make that be one less like thing you have to install, which is a good thing, I think. So I'm just excited about that change, and I can't wait till I can actually use it in my code. Also, shout out podcasts. So there's a podcast called Darknet Diaries that I highly recommend. Have any of you guys heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of it multiple times. I haven't listened to it, but I've heard it mentioned elsewhere.
Okay. Yeah, you would love it. Almost every episode is gold. It's like basically it's stories about cybercrime, but the host is really good at explaining things in a clear way and an understandable way. So there's not a lot of jargon, or if there is, it's explained well. And then it just gets into the people behind it. So he'll interview oftentimes people who are either like criminals who went to jail, and they'll talk about like what their story of how they, got into internet crime, spamming, selling drugs on the dark web or whatever. And you get this glimpse into a part of the like cyber underworld that you normally just, you normally don't get, because you actually get to hear from them. And then, so it's really interesting. And then they'll also interview security like industry people who do like really cool stuff for their jobs. So sometimes they'll interview people who like do incident response. So like they'll talk about, the time that a big company got hacked and like what they did, like what it was like being in that room, and what are the kinds of things the attacker was doing and how they were trying to stop it. So it's all just like really good narrative. Like basically every episode has a really good story to it. Some of my favorite ones were episodes that they had about physical security. So there's actually a job you can have where you go and try to break into banks, and the bank pays you. So that's like I didn't really know that much about that, and just hearing about that was super, super interesting. Their job was like find a way into the bank. And so they'll just scope the bank out, find the door in the back that isn't open, that sometimes is left open, or they'll use crazy like James Bond contraptions to like break into the building. And then they'll talk about how they're trying to find a computer to plug their USB stick into. It's like a movie, but it's like real life. So it's pretty fun. Highly recommend it. And then I'll also just shout out one other podcast called Risky Business, which is if you're trying to get into like the security industry and just learn about security, it's kind of a fun weekly news recap of like all the cybersecurity kind of news and events from the week. Yeah, those are my picks.
Awesome. One more question for you. If people want to connect with you online, where do they find you?
I'm on Twitter, just Feross. My name is Feross, Feross. You can follow me there, or my website, feross.org. And, socket is socket.dev. Those are the URLs.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll get part 2 scheduled. And until next time, folks, Max out.
Adios.
See you later.
Adios.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.